There is a truth every man senses but rarely names. A current running beneath muscle, ambition, intellect, and will. Not mystical, not supernatural, but elemental. A force older than civilization, older than language, older than the stories men once carved into stone. This is the primal energy of a man, the internal fuel that decides whether he rises with purpose or drifts without direction. Ancient cultures spoke of it with reverence, but not because they worshipped the body. They understood something simple and brutal. A man becomes powerful only when he learns to master what moves him from within. They honored this energy because they saw what happens when it is scattered and what happens when it is forged. Today, the world has forgotten the language of reverence, yet the principle remains unchanged. A man's strength is not measured by how loud he speaks or how fast he moves. It is measured by the depth of his inner current, the steadiness of his intention, and the discipline with which he shapes his instincts. Nothing in him is accidental. Nothing in him is disposable. Every impulse can become chaos, or it can become momentum. Every desire can lead him off his path, or harden his resolve. The question is not whether a man has energy. Every man does. The question is whether he commands it. Energy without direction becomes distraction. Energy without discipline becomes weakness. But energy under control becomes presence, vision, and drive. It becomes the quiet force behind achievement, the unshakable center that others feel before he ever speaks. And so the first principle is simple and unforgiving. Power begins with self-possession. Before a man can build anything in the world, he must claim the territory within himself, because in the end, the greatest divide among men is this: some leak their power without knowing it, while others channel it with intention. The ones who rise are the ones who choose to direct their inner fire instead of being directed by it. Yet in the modern world, this inner fire is rarely recognized and even more rarely guarded. Men are not defeated by armies or hardship. They are undone by distraction. The battlefield has shifted from the physical to the psychological, and most never notice the moment they begin to slip. The constant pull of digital stimulation fractures their attention. Their minds jump from one impulse to another, conditioned to seek the smallest reward with the least effort. Every swipe, every notification, every carefully engineered image trains the brain to crave pleasure without purpose. And slowly, the man who once carried a clear direction becomes scattered inside. He feels it but cannot explain it. His focus shortens, his patience thins, his motivation fades without warning. The hunger that once pushed him forward is replaced by a restless emptiness. He is not weak by nature. He is simply overwhelmed by a world designed to break his concentration. When the mind is constantly pulled outward, the self begins to dissolve. A man loses the weight of his presence. He forgets the calm authority that comes from stillness. He reacts rather than chooses. He reaches for comfort instead of challenge. In this state, even his instincts betray him, not because they are flawed, but because they are unanchored. He becomes a man living on the surface of his own life, drifting through days without a center, without a mission, without the sharpness that once defined him. This is how men lose themselves today, not through dramatic collapse, but through a slow erosion of attention and intention. And the tragedy is quiet. No one sees the moment a man stops steering his life, but he feels it, deeply, a silent recognition that he is capable of more, yet somehow slipping into less. To rise again, he must first understand that nothing steals a man's power faster than the constant surrender of his focus. But losing himself does not mean he must reject what moves inside him. A man's instincts are not his enemy. They are the raw material of his strength, the unrefined metal waiting to be shaped. Every pulse of desire, every surge of aggression, every spark of ambition is simply energy in its earliest form. Left unchecked, that energy can scatter him. Left unexamined, it can mislead him. But when claimed and directed, it becomes the foundation of his power. Freud understood this when he spoke of sublimation, the transformation of primal drives into creativity, discipline, and achievement. He was not calling men to suppress themselves. He was calling them to evolve their impulses into something higher. Jung echoed the same truth. A man does not rise by fleeing from the forces within him. He rises by integrating them, by giving them purpose. by shaping them into allies rather than shadows. The instinct is not the problem. The absence of mastery is. Instinct without awareness becomes compulsion. Instinct without intention becomes distraction. But instinct brought into consciousness becomes momentum. It becomes the heat that tempers a man's character, the pressure that hardens his resolve. This is why the strongest men are not those who deny their impulses, but those who understand them so completely that they can direct them toward a vision. They do not fear their inner fire. They forge it. They stand in front of the raw force inside them and say, "This is mine to shape." Because the truth is simple. A man's instincts are like unshaped steel. Left in the earth, they remain potential, drawn out, heated, hammered, and refined. They become the blade he carries through life. And this is where the true divide between men emerges. Strength does not come from instinct alone. It comes from the man who governs that instinct with clarity and discipline. Self-control is not restriction. It is the architecture of power. A man who cannot direct himself will be directed by everything around him. But a man who commands his own impulses becomes immovable. He becomes a force that shapes his environment instead of being shaped by it. Self-control begins with recognition, the ability to see your impulses as they rise without being pulled by them. Most men react before they even realize they have chosen. But the man who pauses, who observes, who decides rather than obeys his urges, gains something rare in this age of immediacy. He gains inner sovereignty. From that sovereignty comes emotional stability. When a man is no longer tossed by every feeling, he becomes steady. His presence deepens. His decisions sharpen. People feel the difference, even if they cannot name it, because a man anchored in himself radiates a calm intensity that cannot be faked. This steadiness is the soil from which respect grows. Not the loud, demanding kind of respect, but the quiet kind that forms when others sense a center of gravity in you. The world listens differently to a man who does not waver. He speaks less, but with more weight. He moves slower, but with more intention. His choices carry authority because they come from a mind disciplined enough to stand firm against its own storms. Self-control also restores direction. When a man is no longer pulled in a dozen directions by impulse, he can choose a single path and commit to it fully. Focus becomes a weapon. Consistency becomes a signal. And the energy he once lost through distraction becomes fuel for momentum. What was scattered becomes concentrated. What was chaotic becomes ordered. This is how vision is built. This is how achievement is forged. Most men chase control over circumstances. They want the world to bend to their will. But the paradox is timeless. Only the man who controls himself can influence anything beyond himself. Influence is the echo of discipline. Leadership is the shadow of inner command. A man who does not need external validation becomes impossible to manipulate. A man who does not seek constant stimulation becomes impossible to weaken. A man who does not run from discomfort becomes impossible to break. This is the quiet truth. Self-control is not about denying your humanity. It is about owning it. It is the reclaiming of your inner territory, the anchoring of your identity, the sharpening of your will. Everything a man wants to build, to protect, to become begins here. Before power can move outward, it must be established within. To command yourself is one thing. To convert that command into momentum is another. Energy does not disappear simply because a man becomes disciplined. It gathers. It builds pressure, and pressure must be directed, or it will turn inward and fracture him. Mastery requires strategy, not the strategy of tricks or hacks, but the strategy of a man who understands himself and channels his inner current with purpose. It begins with observation. A man must learn to recognize the rhythms of his own desire, the moments when he is most vulnerable to distraction, the situations that pull him away from who he intends to be. When he sees these patterns clearly, he no longer moves blindly. Awareness becomes his first form of leverage. What once controlled him becomes something he can anticipate and steer. From awareness comes the removal of unnecessary stimulus. The world is engineered to extract attention, to scatter focus, to keep a man reacting instead of creating. Reducing the noise is not weakness. It is the clearing of mental ground so something stronger can be built. When a man limits the dopamine quick hits that fragment his mind, he frees space for depth. His thoughts become less frantic. His intentions grow roots. The mind that was once overstimulated becomes a sharp instrument again. But cutting distraction is only half the work. The energy reclaimed must be given direction. Physical training becomes the first outlet, not merely to strengthen the body, but to forge consistency and convert restless impulses into disciplined effort. The gym becomes a crucible where instinct is shaped through repetition and strain. Each rep becomes a reminder that energy can be commanded. Then comes creation. Every man holds ideas that die because his focus is drained before he can act on them. When his energy stops leaking, he can pour it into building something real. A business, a craft, a skill, a mission that outlives mood and motivation. The same current that once fueled distraction now fuels productivity. He discovers momentum not as a temporary spark, but as a state of being. To sustain this, a man establishes internal boundaries. Not rules imposed by fear, but principles chosen from strength. He decides what he allows into his mind. He decides what earns his time. He decides what aligns with his direction. These boundaries become the silent walls that protect his progress. Through them, he learns to say no, not as defense, but as leadership. He chooses the path deliberately. And beneath all of this lies presence, the ability to inhabit the moment with full attention, to breathe with intention, to walk with clarity, to speak with weight. Presence is the signature of a man whose energy is no longer leaking. It is the visible expression of internal order. When a man carries himself this way, the world responds differently, not because he demands it, but because he radiates centeredness. This is the transformation. Instinct becomes awareness. Awareness becomes discipline. Discipline becomes direction. Direction becomes power. A man does not rise by accident. He rises by channeling the energy already inside him into strength that can be felt, seen, and followed. When a man learns to channel his inner current, something in him changes in ways the world cannot ignore. He becomes a different kind of presence, not louder, not harsher, but deeper. The modern archetype of masculinity is often confused with noise, aggression, or constant display. Yet the man who has mastered himself carries a quieter, heavier power. He does not chase validation because his direction comes from within. He does not cling to attention because his worth is not measured by the eyes of others. His energy is contained, and because it is contained, it is undeniable. People sense this containment before he speaks. They feel it in the calm of his posture, the steadiness of his gaze, the grounded tone of his voice. He is not pulled by impulses or scattered by stimulation. His actions come from principle, not emotion. His choices come from clarity, not desperation. Women recognize the difference instantly. They are drawn not to his need, but to his restraint. They feel the gravity of a man who stands on his own foundation. Men feel it too, in the subtle respect they offer to someone who does not waver. This new kind of man is not at war with his instincts, nor enslaved by them. He has integrated them into a unified force. His ambition is focused. His attention is sharp. His emotional landscape is stable. He does not lose himself in chaos because he has built order inside. He moves through the world with direction, not drift, with intention, not impulse, with presence, not performance. And through this presence, he influences without trying. Others adjust to his pace because his pace is deliberate. Others listen because his silence has weight. Others follow because he stands where they hesitate. This is the man shaped by self-command, defined not by the intensity of his desires, but by the discipline that guides them. He is not a product of the world around him. He is the architect of his own center, and in that center, he becomes the kind of man the modern age has forgotten but desperately needs. In the end, everything a man seeks to build returns to a single truth. His energy is not an accident. It is a responsibility. The world will always pull at him, distract him, tempt him to fracture his focus and surrender his direction. But the man who chooses self-command steps onto a different path. He stops living from impulse and starts living from intention. He stops being pushed by circumstance and starts shaping circumstance through presence and discipline. This journey is not about denying desire or suppressing instinct. It is about owning the forces that move within you and directing them towards something worthy, a mission, a craft, a legacy. When a man aligns his inner world, The outer world responds. His actions gain weight. His words carry resonance. His life begins to form around a center that cannot be shaken. Every man reaches a moment when he must decide who he wants to become, not in the eyes of others, but in the quiet space where he confronts himself. That moment defines the path ahead. Will he drift, scattered by the noise of the modern age, or will he rise with clarity and purpose? The call is simple. Return to your center, guard your focus, channel your energy, build the foundation within you that no chaos can touch. You do not need to announce your strength. When you master yourself, your presence speaks for you. This is the journey of the man who chooses to awaken.